All right, welcome everybody to day one of Maxim Group's Virtual Growth Conference. My name is Naureen Quibria. I'm one of the senior biotech analysts here at Maxim, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next company for Fireside Chat, Immutep. We have with us the CEO of Immutep, Marc Voigt. So Marc, exciting times for the LAG-3 space. How are you doing?
Hi, Naureen. First of all, thank you for having me, and indeed, very exciting time. So we are doing great.
So yes, just to, so absolutely, we have a third class of checkpoint therapeutics that have been approved, Bristol's LAG-3, and for those in the audience who aren't familiar, if it weren't for your CMO, Chief Medical Officer Frederic Tribault, we would not be here today. He was the one that discovered LAG-3. So congratulations not only to obviously Bristol for a great achievement in getting the drug approved, but obviously Frederic for the discovery in itself. So, just to jump into things, for those that aren't familiar with LAG-3 and Immutep, could you give us a brief overview of the company and the pipeline?
Sure. Thank you, Naureen. So Immutep is a biotech company. We are active in immuno-oncology as well as in autoimmune diseases. We have actually more programs than anyone else around LAG-3, also more than BMS or any other big pharma. And we are also the only LAG-3 pure play. We are globally active, so we have offices in different countries such as Australia, Germany, France, and we have also a subsidiary in the United States. We are active in R&D, so we have multiple different clinical trials. We have 4 programs in total, 2 in autoimmune diseases, 2 in immuno-oncology, 2 of the 4 exclusively worldwide out-licensed, 1 to Novartis, the other 1 to GlaxoSmithKline. And we push forward in 2 other very exciting programs, one called eftilagimod and the other one IMP 761. And we are obviously listed on the NASDAQ, ticker symbol IMMP.
Great. We'll probably focus mostly on your lead program, FD, today, in the interest of time. So there are so many clinical trials ongoing with LAG-3 targeted therapies, right? I could count at least 70 plus that are now recruiting, a lot of them combination studies. So when you look at FT versus what else is out there, the LAG-3 inhibitors, the bispecifics, other modalities, what makes it differentiated from all those other LAG-3 approaches? Is it the biology? What is it?
Yeah, so indeed, eftilagimod alpha, or brief FD, is a unique program. Practically, you have on the one hand side the so-called immune checkpoint inhibitors, so anti-LAG-3, like from Bristol Myers Squibb or our licensee Novartis, and few other players. So there are actually many different clinical trials, thousands of patients in the LAG-3 space as such. But then we have in oncology eftilagimod, and eftilagimod is LAG-3 itself, which we use to touch the other side of the LAG-3 MHC class 2 interaction. So it's LAG-3 and major ligand MHC class 2. And we are touching MHC class 2. So it's an MHC class 2 agonist, actually the only one of its kind globally. So it's a truly unique asset. If you would negatively refer to anti-LAG-3, you would call it me-too programs. So there we have a unique differentiator in terms of the mode of action and the way it works. So it provides the immune system with a broader push. So we activate the antigen-presenting cells, dendritic cells, monocytes, and then via the physiological way, more CD8, CD4, and natural killer cells. So it's a broader immune response. And of course, it has to prove itself in the various different clinical trials we are running.
Right. So, so speaking of the mechanism of action, it works through so broadly through the APC, natural killer cells, dendritic, as you mentioned, so in the clinic though, how is it differentiated? Are you already seeing that, in terms of safety and efficacy?
Indeed, we have multiple different clinical trials. We treated hundreds of patients. I believe it's fair to say in the combination with Keytruda, that we, if you look at the different indications by and large, typically double what you see with Keytruda as a response rate in the combination. We have also very good results in the combination with chemotherapy. So eftilagimod is an agent which seems to make a difference in different combinations, in different indications, and this is our strategy, to have different clinical settings. And so far, in terms of safety, in terms of efficacy, the data is published. We are very, very pleased, and we are having strategically a very important year, 2022. And now with the validation of the MHC class 2 LAG-3 validation, we hope, of course, for much more.
Great. And just one last thing sort of on that same topic, you know, if we're looking at these different approaches, and when you look at these other studies that are ongoing with LAG-3 approaches, some of them are, you know, looking at patients that are enriched for LAG-3 versus others that are not. You're not doing that either. So, you know, can you perhaps educate us on, you know, why it's not necessary with FT and the approach that you're taking, the strategy that you're taking?
First of all, overall biomarker strategies are, of course, important in terms of the anti-LAG-3 players, such as BMS or Novartis. You try to detect at the end of the day if patients are potentially responding or not, similar to PD-L1 and the anti-PD-1 space, and this is why there are companion diagnostics for LAG-3, and the more LAG-3 you express, theoretically, the better you may respond to an anti-LAG-3 therapy. By the way, we are supporting that. We have a collaboration with LabCorp, so we are also advising them and provide some know-how, and they are a professional player in companion diagnostic. But eftilagimod, as it is LAG-3 itself, wouldn't benefit from measuring LAG-3 levels. There we look at potentially different biomarkers. Mm-hmm. So eftilagimod, for instance, could look at the level of monocytes. With monocytopenia, it may not work. That might be between 1 to 3% of all patients. So of course, we have a biomarker strategy. We look at different things, level of increase of CD8 T cells, which we were in a position to do statistically significant in metastatic breast cancer. So different therapies, different mode of actions, different biomarker strategies.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And you know, you have, gosh, so many programs in combination studies, which is the future, the way of the future, right? Combination studies with different standard of care. One of your lead studies is in breast cancer, HR positive, HER2 negative. You just completed a very large study called APAC. We'll dive into that a little bit, but I'm just curious, you know, looking at the space in general, there have been 2 studies that haven't yielded, shall we say, the most exciting results, right? We had Gilead's TROPiCS-02 study with Trodelvy that we don't know exactly the precise top-line results, but it doesn't sound like the results were stellar. And then right after that, a few days after, we had Sanofi with a MIRA-3 study, phase 2 study, where they didn't reach the primary endpoint of PFS and some other endpoints. So, you know, what are your thoughts on those trials, and how, you know, do you have any takeaways for your own potential future registration study based on these studies?
First of all, indeed, hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative is a challenging space. You have different lines of therapy, endocrine therapy, and then the CDK4/6 inhibitors came into play from 2017 onwards. The PI3K inhibitors, there are different tests. So it's a changing landscape, but it's also a tough nut to crack, especially for immuno-oncology. Most approaches in immuno-oncology are focused on triple negative breast cancer, not on the bigger patient population I just mentioned. Of course, we hope from all the trials which are ongoing in that space that patients can benefit, so and wish best success for other approaches which are out there, but indeed, it seems to be a tough nut to crack. You can always criticize the specific trial designs, looking at ESR1 mutation or not, looking at PFS as a single primary endpoint or not. This would need to be done by other people. Of course, we carefully observe what's going on there, also in terms of potential competitive approaches. and try to factor that into our own planning for phase 3.
Okay, so that makes sense. So now let's focus on FT and APAC, right? Can you, for those that aren't really familiar with the study, can you just walk us through, the study itself and the results that you got, just a high-level overview?
Yeah, the APEX study is a double-blind randomized clinical trial in 226 patients in different European countries, such as France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, and so on and so forth. Right. It's a study which is where we have been presenting at SITC at the late breaker last year, final overall survival results. And we saw overall an increase in terms of overall survival by close to 3 months. We saw also an increase in terms of quality of life and in pre-specified subgroups, so before unblinding. We saw clinically meaningful results, for instance, in patients below 65 years of age, in patients with low monocytes or with luminal B, so different or a little bit the more aggressive disease type. These results have been published. In low monocytes, for instance, we saw a median overall survival increase close to 20 months, statistically significant with a hazard ratio of 0.44, meaning that the likelihood of dying, this is the event obviously you look at, would be reduced at any given point in time by 56%, which is, I believe, quite good. If you look at the approval from 1.5 weeks ago for BMS, we congratulate them, of course. The risk reduction was 20%, just to put things into perspective. Different indication, different setup, different clinical trial, but just for the audience to see what is meaningful or not. We saw also a statistically significant increase of cytotoxic CD8 T cells, FT, compared to the chemo plus placebo group. And we were able to link those results to an increased overall survival. So in other words, what I said earlier on, we boost the immune system. We can measure that in patients. The better the immune status, the better is the outcome in terms of overall survival. And this with a good quality of life and a relatively safe approach.
Right. So, okay, so you did see clinical benefit in 3 different subpopulations, right? The idea is to potentially pursue 1 or more of those in a registration-directed study. I believe you've now had a end of phase 2 meetings with both the FDA and EMA, right? And you've sort of gotten a buy-in, I'm guessing, on a potential trial design. I don't know. So are you able to speak to, like, do you have an idea about, or have you made a decision on the phase 3 trial design, if you haven't already, and when will you be able to, sort of announce that to investors?
Indeed, we have a very rigorous planning process. Phase 3 is always a big undertaking, so you have to make sure that you are on target. The philosophy is to overcome some of the shortcomings in APEC. For instance, scheduling of paclitaxel has been done the European way, stopping after 6 months. And we would, in a phase 3 study, do it the US way, which is to provide it up to progression. Also, we of course discussed with EMA, FDA, our clinical advisory board, with other KOLs, and we would like to design a trial which is more on target. So APEC had, if you like, unselected overall patient population, and of course we would like to focus on patients who are more likely to benefit from the treatment. There are different ideas, could also be different biomarkers. Actually, we are going to present their poster at the upcoming ESMO Breast Cancer Conference in early May. So it's definitely worth looking at, I believe. There are the 3 subgroups you have been mentioning. There's also a subgroup with no prior taxanes we presented on the poster at the SITC. In other words, there are different possibilities. I do not like to focus on a specific subset of patients here publicly, and when we rediscuss the trial design with competent authorities and update the markets with maybe a slightly different outcome, we will of course discuss the trial design in the period to come. But we are also taking the time in this process to really make sure, as it will be a study which should be conducted in the US and in Europe, that everything is consolidated, has the right focus so that we can move forward in a very robust way.
Okay, so that makes sense. So let's just think about just the 3 subgroups, right? That you did see clinical benefit. You know, let's pretend it's, you know, if you're considering all those 3, what is the market opportunity there for FD?
Breast cancer is a relatively big cancer indication. You see in the major markets around about 2 million cases per year. Hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative accounts for around about 70% of metastatic breast cancer. So it's unlike triple negative, where a lot of work is done as we speak, 10–15%. So it's a big indication. Of course, the potential label and the commercial approach would need to be seen in the light of the trial design, because this would define the label at the end of the day. But just to be very clear, for instance, eftilagimod and that combination could also work in triple negative breast cancer patients. So it's not a mode of action question. It's more a question of definition in order to have the right trial design and also the right numbers and robust statistical setup. But overall, it's a big indication.
Okay, that's great. So in terms of, are you considering a phase 3 study this year initiating, just out of curiosity, or you haven't decided that yet?
It could be. We need to see, also in the light of the other upcoming opportunities we are having, which we will discuss in a second.
Okay, you're right. So moving on from breast cancer, because there's so many programs that you do have, and some exciting results are with Merck's Keytruda in combination with head and neck, and as well as lung cancer in both frontline and second line. So if we just focus on the head and neck opportunity, or the study results that you've had so far, can you actually talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's from a study called Tactile 02, where we looked at second-line head and neck cancer. The data has been published at ESCO and at SITC. I believe very exciting data. It's a study which we conduct in collaboration with Merck, looking at the so-called PD-L1 all-comer patient population. So irrespective if they are supposed to react to Keytruda very well, suboptimally, or not at all, we recruited everyone. We saw very strong results. Actually, our complete response rate, where the tumor is completely disappearing, is in line with best available standard of care overall response rate. So in terms of tumor shrinkage in second-line head and neck cancer. Of course, one needs to be careful, historic comparisons, but it's very encouraging. We by and large doubled what you would typically expect with Keytruda in second-line head and neck cancer. And this actually prompted us and Merck to enter into a new collaboration and go in first-line head and neck cancer in a registration-relevant clinical trial, which is actually recruiting. And the designation is Tactile 03. We are very excited about that. So overall, head and neck cancer, smaller indication, very high unmet medical need, very aggressive disease. Is success in second line and an ongoing study in first line, also based on fast track designation by the FDA in April last year.
Right. And so, we've seen some recent data from that, Tactile 02. Will we see more from Tactile 02 or even initial updates from Tactile 03 this year?
Yeah, Tactile 03, indeed. There you could expect updates. We are currently recruiting a study startup phase in terms of site initiation, countries on study. So you could expect more, and then more robust, especially from second half of this year onward. Of course, we are super excited because it's a randomized clinical trial, and this is always something which is exciting and worth looking at, I believe. Overall, for second line, I think medically, the data we published at SITC is telling the story. There you see that we have long-term durable responses and that we are tracking actually very, very well.
Right. And Tactile 02, I believe it's a multi-center European study, right? Or is it global? In any case, yeah. So, you know, it is tragic what's happening with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Do you have any exposure there in terms of clinical sites and the study ongoing there?
Indeed, it's tragic what's going on over there. We have a bit of clinical exposure, not too much. So the study is, of course, not at risk. It's fully recruited already since last year. So everything is going very well in terms of Ukrainian patients. We are, of course, supporting as much as we can. One thing is the study being at risk or not, clearly not. But the other thing is, of course, and importantly, the ethical commitment you have. So we support as much as we can.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, so now Tactile II, it wasn't just head and neck. We've got the lung cancer, right? Both front line, second line. So let's dive into that a little bit. Can you talk about the data you've seen so far? You know, any updates and all that?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, first and second line non-small cell lung cancer, two very interesting settings, very exciting. Again, PD-L1 all-comer. We saw last year at ESCO data from first line non-small cell lung cancer, looking at the combination of Keytruda plus eftilagimod. And again, by and large, we have been able to double the response rate, and we see long-term durable responses. And we are not adding a lot in terms of the safety profile. So here we are super excited, and there is important data coming up in first half of this year from first-line non-small cell lung cancer from round about 100 patients. We said publicly that we November 2020 that we enlarged that set. Originally we had 36 patients, now 114, and we did that in order to possibly plan, if the data would be good enough, for late-stage development. So if the data is good enough, we can move forward in, I believe, one very exciting indication, maybe a kind of crown jewel in immuno-oncology. And the data is coming up within 3 months, possibly. So let's see what we can achieve there. And for second-line non-small cell lung cancer, we had an abstract publication last week for the refractory setting, PDX refractory setting. And the poster will follow this week. So it's also very exciting, even though the response rate wasn't very high, disease control rate already quite encouraging. It's a tough setting where the patients have a confirmatory second scan to confirm their progress. First scan, tumor growth. Second scan to confirm that the tumor is growing. So truly refractory, something you don't see often. It's the toughest industry standard, and the data would need to be seen in the light of that. But it seems we can make a change. And in the poster, you will see also overall survival data, and you will see safety and tumor dynamics. And I believe this is very important to put it together. So we are also excited in terms of the second line non-small cell lung cancer. We can't always report 30–40% response rate, especially if it's refractory and pre-treated with chemotherapy as well.
Yeah.
So let's see.
Yeah, it is a tough setting. A lot of people are in that space too. So, and it's hard to compare and contrast. So, you know, it looks, you know, just with FT alone, and we won't even have time to get into the investigator-sponsored studies or the stuff that you have out licensed to GSK and Novartis. But, you know, just focusing on FT and potential registration studies that are upcoming, you know, can you comment a little bit on your cash position and how, you know, if they can support potential registration studies, at least starting?
Yeah, very important point, actually, especially when the markets are a bit more challenging, situation which we have. So we are in a strong financial condition. So we have reported end of last year to have more than $70 million cash on bank. And this is sufficient for a little bit less than 2 years cash life, including the registration relevant Tactile III trial, including starting a new phase 3 trial, including Tactile 02 and potentially other phase 2s. We negotiate every contract and we know that cash is super important. So you can expect us to deal with in a very responsible manner with the cash shareholders, investors have been providing us with. What I can rule out is any short-term cash raise, just to be very clear here, in a market like this with the share price, I believe is suboptimal. We're not going to do that. We are coming from a position of strength. also with multiple partnerships, and now with the fresh LAG-3 MHC class 2 validation and the LAG-3 space moving forward. So I believe we are very well positioned to move forward with our clinical plans, horizontal rollout and vertical rollout of eftilagimod, especially eftilagimod. We haven't had the chance to discuss autoimmune diseases, which is also exciting in itself. So you can expect a lot from us during the course of this year and of course beyond.
Okay, excellent. So, you know, I think we have to wrap it up, but, you know, do you have any other parting thoughts for us before we leave?
Yeah, I would like to point especially to the development we are having now. So we have now second-line non-small cell lung cancer. Poster will come out, I believe, tomorrow or the day thereafter from the European Lung Cancer Conference. Look at the poster, judge on the data. Next stop then is in about 5 weeks from now, ESMO breast cancer, additional data out of the APEX study. And then strategically most important actually is the first-line non-small cell lung cancer data. If that would be positive, I think it would be pretty big actually. And we are not fearing any competition, just to be very clear. Anti-LAG-3 is not our benchmark. Our benchmark is best available standard of care, plus everything else, which is in late-stage development. There we would need to make a difference. That's our ambition, and let's see what we can achieve. And then a lot of data will follow. We are also working on scaling up to commercial scale in terms of manufacturing. So we are running full steam ahead in terms of clinical development, manufacturing, regulatory affairs, and the steps in terms of market access. And I feel also that LAG-3 is discussed with a great deal of excitement also from the big players.
Fantastic. Okay, so I have to, we have to go now, but, you know, very excited to follow Immutep and see what's happening the rest of the year. Thank you for joining us.
Naureen, thank you so much.
Bye.